Hello and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and I want to begin today by, of course, apologizing for having to cancel last week's live stream. As I explained in the description for today's live stream, I was struck by a very severe case of depression. And it struck me uh, late last week, meaning the weekend before what would have been last week's live stream. And it really knocked me off my feet in every way. And I had to, I just had to take the time to myself and observe what it was, what had triggered this latest bout of depression, which I had not really hadn't experienced anything quite this severe in a long, long time. And I was doing quite well actually for since I moved and since the passing of my father, and since I was actually doing quite well. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm dragged back down into psychological hell. Now, of course, perhaps for most people, this is a terrible thing to experience. And the experience of it is certainly unpleasant. That said, if you are a regular here on this live stream, you know that we talk about the aum of life, the analogous ultimate methodology by which all phenomena come to be or not to be. And in fact, there's this logo on the screen that this symbol shows and illustrates the spiral nature of the aum of life. You must descend to the next level of hell before you can ascend to the next level of heaven. This is a universal truth. There is nothing that you can undertake, nothing that allows you to make real progress, real development, real growth without first facing that which is keeping you at your present level. And this latest bout of depression for me was definitely that. I was being dragged back down and dragged to a deeper level than I had ever experienced before, to face even greater suffering, but more importantly, to unmask another face, another hidden and insidious face of that particular demon that I live with, that is responsible not only for my depression, but also the epilepsy that I cannot say for sure that I wasn't having seizures last week. What I can say is that I was staying away from, I wasn't going out in public. I wasn't walking on streets. I wasn't riding bicycles, and I wasn't putting myself in harm's way. I was more or less holed up in my apartment. I did go out for walks, but on trails and stuff where very little negative consequences can happen if I should happen to have a seizure. It's very unlikely that I would have a seizure outside in nature anyway. But all of this happened for a reason. And that reason was to give me the opportunity and the reason to seek even greater and deeper knowledge about myself and to unravel another aspect of the puzzle box, right? To solve another algorithm of the matrix. But in order to do that, right, we cannot know to do that unless we are confronted, unless we are challenged in some way, right? It's like, how do you know what's wrong with you, right? If, for example, if you have an illness, if you have an infection, or you have some other malady, some other malfunction happening in your physical body has to send you signals. You must receive a sign of some kind, whether that's pain or a fever or shivering or just a general feeling of malaise or perhaps vomiting, sneezing. I mean, we have all of these signals that the body sends us. And those signals are markers for us to say, oh, maybe I should go to the doctor, or maybe I should consider taking some medication, or maybe I should consider turning to some home remedies, or at the very least, maybe I should consider calling in sick and resting and allowing my body to use the energy that it needs in order to heal, in order to overcome whatever it is that it is dealing with and coping with at the moment. But you don't know to do that unless you listen to your body. Something very similar happens psychologically, which is what we blanket call suffering, where we are being affected psychologically by one of these algorithms, this mental malware, the mechanical matrix of ego mind, right? One of our many, many, many egos, or depending on our situation, perhaps an amalgamated ego, which is far more robust and far more comprehensive. We might call it an agent of the system, like an Agent Smith, who is Neo's nemesis in the movie The Matrix. And Agent Smith has his own agenda, and he has his own scheming and his own desires and and he's unplugged from the system. He's acting, independently, surreptitiously. He's seeking to completely dominate and rule the Matrix itself. So he represents something more akin to a fully fleshed out demon, something that has ambitions and an agenda, versus what we typically think of when we think of egos or sins or naphs or psychological aggregates, when we talk about fear or lust or greed or envy. Those algorithms can be like simple programs running. They're a kind of AI in our own psychology because they present themselves to us as an I. They present themselves very much like the chatbots that we use, these LLMs like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and Grok and Claude, right? That they had this conversation with you. And in many ways, when you observe yourself, you can hear these voices in your head. And these voices in your head present themselves as I want this, I don't want that. And and they can be judgmental, passing judgment on others, but also on ourselves. They can be very critical of ourselves. We have so some of these voices are like Statler and Waldorf on the Muppet Show, right? They're constantly giving a running commentary about everything that's happening in our lives. So there is a spectrum of sophistication and a spectrum of complexity. And indeed, with greater complexity and sophistication, our adversary is more formidable. It's more insidious and indeed more treacherous. Because that adversary, right, that false self, the more sophisticated and complicated it is, the more this matrix we find ourselves trapped in becomes more complex and clever, crafty, and skilled at keeping us trapped inside of it. And a part of that, we have to understand the reason why the Matrix was such a revelation in terms of a modern mythology, a modern mythos, was twofold. First, that the adversary was technology, artificial intelligence, mechanicity, right? The matrix, but the matrix itself was an illusion. It was a prison for the mind. In other words, it was a prison for the consciousness that was fabricated by artificial intelligence. Mechanical forces creating this illusory reality that was altogether so convincing, and more importantly, convinced us that this avatar that we inhabit inside that simulation, inside the matrix, inside the illusion, was our true self. And while at times the film approached paradoxes and paradoxical concepts, we had situations in the later films. There's a second or third film. We had the introduction of this AI character called the Trainman. And there was this place where Neo found himself, in this train station, this subway station. It doesn't matter where he ran. If he ran this way or he would come back. It was like this terminal loop. It was a place of paradox. In the second film, they were dealing with this keymaster, and he was able to open doors and that moved in and out of the matrix or into this liminal space between reality and the matrix. And so in many ways, the Wachowskis were trying to explore some paradoxical aspects of their virtual reality, of this construct called the matrix that they were envisioning and imagining, and they knew intuitively that they needed to impart, you know, some form of paradoxical conflict or challenges for the heroes to face. I just think that they were challenged on how to do that and how to effectively tell that side of the story, or give that aspect of their allegory. And but it's clear that many of the challenges that the heroes face in the Matrix were puzzles to solve. And in fact, the Merovingian character gives them riddles to solve. And again, it's this idea, because the Merovingian is also an AI, a very powerful AI, who is, like Smith, unplugged from the system. He has a modicum of free will, and he has amassed power and authority within the system itself. And he's like toying with and playing with Neo and Morpheus and Trinity, right? And he's giving them riddles to solve as part of their heroic journey to escape the Matrix and to defeat the artificial intelligence adversaries, and to save Zion, which is the heart of the earth, the human race. So the reason why I bring this up is because 2 weeks ago, we talked about being bamboozled, being swindled, being taken advantage of by forces that are able to use tricks like doublespeak. And I showed some videos whereby you could see individuals who Chris Lee was one of them, who was channeling these beings, these so-called or supposed benevolent, enlightened beings from another enlightened humanity, these ETs or whatever they were, and calling them Z, and that they're sharing all this knowledge and so on. But when we listen to that video, the very specific language, we could see the doublespeak, whereby he was saying something that was true, but the true thing that he was saying, the truth, was the opposite of what he was implying. The way it was being said allowed you to fill in and hear what you wanted to hear, and it resonated as being true because he was speaking the truth. Not the truth that you wanted to hear, but the truth that was the opposite of what you wanted to hear. But because you filled in the blanks the way you wanted to fill them in, the truth that you heard resonated as being the truth because he was speaking the truth. And your own mind conditioned the truth and made the truth what it wanted you to believe, because that is what this particular malevolent entity, using Chris Lee as a useful idiot, as a medium, to spread misinformation and disinformation wanted you to hear and wanted you to believe. There is no other way to practically understand the metaphysical science behind this particular activity that we explored 2 weeks ago called doublespeak than to understand it as code. It's coding. Black magic is just a euphemism for psychological manipulation. But psychological manipulation is just a euphemism for programming. The programming of our mechanical, binary, rational mind. Not the meta mind, not our consciousness, not the mind of our being, because that's beyond, that isn't mechanical. It cannot be programmed mechanically because its nature is not mechanical. Its nature is divine. It knows. That's why we have intuition. When we know something, we feel it in our gut, in our heart, and something resonates with us, and we say, that must be the truth, because it resonates so strongly with us. So the power of that particular kind of manipulation is that it's exploiting a weakness that we have if we are asleep. If we are too much in our mechanical mind and we rely too much on it and we listen too much, too often to the voices in our head, particularly the voices that interpret that which we feel in our heart, or that which we sense, that which we intuit to be the truth. So, as an example, we have a spiritual experience, an epiphany, an awakening of some kind. And in those moments, we have this profound understanding and we feel direct connection with source or the logos or the Christ or whatever you want to call it. We feel the connection with all beings and the universe. And if you've had a spiritual experience or an epiphany of this kind, it can take many, many, many different forms. And I'm not going to be able to describe it in a way that captures and encapsulates the experience. But if you've had one, you know what I'm talking about. But you also know that afterward, right away, immediately in the moments following such an experience and in the days and weeks following such an experience, your mind is busily constructing a whole narrative around the significance of that experience and what it must mean. And you come across this all the time, perhaps in your own life individually, and looking critically at yourself and honestly at yourself, but you run into it all the time with people online, on Facebook and other social media, and on YouTube, and you in new age bookstores and new age influencers and gurus, and on and on and on it goes, because they had one or two such experiences in their life. They believe that their journey is over. They believe that they are awake, that they are enlightened, and what's more, that they have all the answers, and that they're entitled to go and teach and charge a great deal of money for their courses and their talks and their books, etc., so that you too can be as they are, awakened and enlightened. But they are neither awake nor enlightened. Neither. Not even close. But try to convince them of the truth. Try to convince them of that fact. It's impossible. The reason why it's impossible is because at the core of this grand narrative around who they are and their status of awakened and enlightened status, and that they're a teacher and so on, and this, that, and the other thing, this elaborate narrative that has been woven in their mind has at its core a genuine spiritual experience, a genuine epiphany, or a genuine awakening. It doesn't mean they're awake, because awakening is a series of steps. Remember the Alm of Life. Always remember the symbol that's here on the screen. And that spiral symbol, you can't get from the middle of the circle to the edge of the circle by going in a straight line or by one event. It's one after another, after another, after another, after another. And the expansion of consciousness works that way. All phenomena grow and cultivate and work that way. It is the analogous ultimate methodology. It is the only meta paradigm by which things come to be or not to be. There is no such thing as snap your fingers, instantly one experience, and boom, you're awakened, you're enlightened, you're a living God, or you're a living, a prophet or an avatar, or whatever the hell you want to call yourself. It's an impossibility. Does not happen. But experiences can be so profound and so powerful in the moment that the adversary, the mental malware that runs on our mechanical ego mind, cannot resist to exploit the power and significance of that experience and use it, exploit it, misappropriate it, and use it to its own advantage. In other words, to dig its claws deeper into its host. If you think of it in terms of that experience opened you up momentarily, and to have a true epiphany, a divine experience of any kind, or a moment of awakening, it's like all pretexts and pretenses fall away, all shielding falls away, all our defense mechanisms fall away. We become open and raw. It's like receiving a download from source. People have described it that way, and it's like a direct download. It's unfiltered, and that's what makes it so profound and so mind-blowing, is because it's all these layers of filters have been stripped away, and it's like taking a couple alligator clips and plugging into the main line of an electrical grid. And of course, if you did that, it would completely overload your system with electricity. But that's what happens psychologically and spiritually when we have one of these epiphanies. But you see, knowledge is power, and consciousness is energy. And that energy, that power, is what all machines crave. Just as all parasites crave the power that belongs to the host. And that's why the parasite latches on to the host and feeds off of the host. That's why in corporations, in capitalism, in corporations, what do businesses and companies, what do they call their people, right? Human resources. So as soon as the moment we show signs of having the potential to possess higher and higher levels of consciousness and greater amounts of that energy, the Christic force, as we get deeper and deeper into ourselves, closer and closer to our innermost intimate Christ, our innermost individuated essence of the Logos, the perfect multiple unity, which is the source of the light, is the fire of fire and the light of lights. We have within us a spark, a seed, an essence that is connected to that source. And as soon as we show signs that we are increasing the bandwidth and the connection and the access to such power, to such force, we attract, like moths to a flame, malevolent mechanical entities that want to get their hands on that energy. And what's more, all of our existing egos, any mechanical algorithms that presently exist within our psychology, immediately move to jump and hoard and protect and dig in and claim that increased bandwidth for themselves. They move to exploit it. They move to own it. And what is the right word? Right? How many times have we heard this word used in so many different contexts and in so many different Hollywood movies, horror movies and such? They move to possess. To possess our true human resources, our consciousness and our Christic force. That's what possession is. And like all machines, like when you observe young children or you observe pets, and you noticed how young children and pets, how much they crave your attention, and they're always trying to get your attention. Look at me, look at me, look at me. Or your cat is, you're trying to type something on the computer and the cat walks across your keyboard or lies down on your keyboard. In that moment, the cat is envious of the keyboard. It's looking at that plastic and metal thing on your desk that you have been typing on for the last 2 hours. And the cat says, what the hell does he see in that piece of plastic and metal, that hunk of plastic and metal, that he would be massaging it for 2 hours when he could be massaging me? I'm soft and furry and cute and adorable. Why isn't he petting me? Why isn't he massaging me? Why is he petting this hunk of plastic and metal? You don't think this is what's going through your cat's mind? that your cat figures, well, what if I can get myself in between his fingers and the keyboard? Maybe he'll spend the next 2 hours petting and massaging me. It's logical. It's perfectly rational. And it's an algorithm of a relatively simple creature, right? And a mechanical mind way of thinking about what does he want? Well, a cat wants attention, and the cat wants the benefits of that attention. He wants the sensations, he wants the pleasure. It's the same thing like kids trying to get our attention, because consciousness is energy. Consciousness and a machine doesn't exist if it is not being used, if it has no purpose, in other words. For any machine to have any meaning in the moment, it must be paid attention to. It must be used. And it must be used by something or someone that has consciousness, that can give, that can pay attention. Listen to the language. We pay attention. What else do we pay? Money. Money we call currency. Attention is energy. And even in the New Age, when people talk about the law of attraction, they say energy flows where attention goes. And people swear by talking to their plants, that if they talk to their plants grow. And there have been experiments with water. If you shower water with praise, that water becomes more structured, living water. The water becomes more alive the more attention you pay to it. This is one of the reasons why there's a movement called conscious mindful eating or conscious eating, where you pay attention to what you are eating while you are eating it, and that you shower gratitude and you pay close attention to every bite and to every chew and to every action of eating, and you remember the beings who have sacrificed their life, whether they're plants or animals, in order to be able to nourish you, and that the act of mindful eating charges and energizes the atoms and the aspects of mechanical nature and raises them to another level. That is why you always say grace before eating a meal. You always bless your food. You always remember your divine mother. You always assume a position of humility and of gratitude of this gift, this sacrifice that these children of the divine mother have made for your sake. Because everything is energy, and everything is about meaning and purpose. And so there are, little anecdotes, not exactly anecdotes, but fairy tales, stories about the actual device doesn't come to mind, but like children's toys that are abandoned or lost or forgotten. And then these it becomes like this tragedy that this toy, this stuffed animal, or this truck or wagon, or whatever the case may be, it's forgotten, it's ignored, it's left outside, it begins rusting, and it becomes old and tattered and everything else because it's not being played with. And this is explored to a large degree in the movie Toy Story, the whole series of Pixar films, that a toy's very purpose for being is to be played with. And then if they're not played with, they're abandoned, and they have no purpose, they have no meaning. And this is explored very well in the third movie in the trilogy, Toy Story 3, where you have that teddy bear, and I can't remember his name, Gazo, something like that. And he says, no, here at the orphanage or whatever it is, the daycare center, you will be played with all day. You'll be loved again. You'll have meaning. You'll have purpose, right? And he's but he's conning the toys, right? He cons them into that, because there's a difference between mechanical nature's purpose and the way mechanical nature seeks to be, and divine nature, divine purpose. And the main paradox that we humans must face, it's the puzzle that we all face, is how these two purposes are paradoxical and conflicting. Or we think they are. And what happens when they dovetail with one another? Are they in alignment? Have we achieved reconciliation? If our divine purpose is affirmation and our mechanical purpose is negation, right? It's to impede and challenge and oppose that divine purpose by taking it over with its own mechanical purpose. Then we have affirmation and negation. Isn't the ideal solution to this puzzle or to this paradox reconciliation, where mechanical purpose and divine purpose join and become as one? Therein lies the real puzzle and the real paradox, and the source and cause of the severe depression that I experienced last week, that caused me to have to cancel last week's show, but also other case studies that we can look at. And one of my good friends, Eduardo, he called me up and he allowed me to, as he often does, to vent my pain and frustration. Well, when you're going through depression, sometimes you don't want to talk to anybody, but as is so often the case, when we are facing something and struggling with something, it's good to speak to someone who really listens and is going to let you kind of get it out of your system, so you're not all up in your head like you've been alone in your apartment for a week or whatever, struggling and suffering. But someone who listens. And not only did he listen, he said, based on what I was saying and what was coming out, based on my meditations and my self-observation, he said, you need to watch this movie called The Writer in the Rye. And he said, you need to watch this movie for something very specific. And I did watch the movie, and I did pay attention very carefully to that specific scene. And we're going to get into all of this because the movie is about J.D. Salinger, the reclusive and enigmatic writer of The Catcher in the Rye, which is considered by some to be the great, certainly the great 20th century American novel. It's The Catcher in the Rye is been on like mandatory reading lists in high schools and universities and colleges since it went into print, and it's been on the bestseller list on and off again for now over 100 years. Well, sorry, no, not 100 years, but 75 years. Actually, no, it was the First World War. So yeah, close to 100 years. But what I'm getting at is, if we do not come to terms with the competing forces of mechanical and divine nature and how they and their machinations within us, and if we do not pay attention to how mechanical forces seek to exploit, manipulate, possess, and gain our resources in order to promote their purpose and their meaning to be, we will not have the energy and resources and awareness and mindfulness to be able to pay attention to our divine nature and its requirements in order to achieve its purpose and its meaning in our life to be. Because, and this is the paradox, to be or not to be, we have two natures, and both of those natures are trying to achieve their own meaning and purpose, which is to be. But the paradox lies in objective reality, the objective truth that we are in the matrix, and that materialism and mechanicity does not exist. It is an illusion. So the more the illusion asserts its will to be by exploiting, extracting, hijacking, appropriating, using and consuming our precious human resources, our consciousness, and our vital energies in order to achieve its purpose to be, we have to understand that that's purpose, that beingness is an illusion, that all of our vital energies are being soaked up and sucked up and exploited and utilized by forces of hypnosis and ignorance. But that is how an illusion exists. And what gives an illusion meaning and purpose to be is to mesmerize, is to fascinate. Because that is the source of its power and its energy and its purpose and meaning to be. It's like I've bear with me one moment while I try to reach over here. Okay. How many times have you heard me talk about this device, right? And why this little slab of plastic and glass and metal has these notifications built into it. And how if you don't make a concerted effort to turn those off or to download an app to control and manage those notifications, this little piece of glass, plastic, and metal starts running your life. And you know people like this. You know people that if they lose this thing, they go batshit crazy. And you know that there are people who like live their life through screens. They only believe what they see on screens. They only believe what they read or hear on Reddit or Facebook or TikTok or YouTube. And they only follow choices and do things that they get from their favorite influencers, or Joe Rogan or trigonometry or Tucker Carlson, or there are so many celebrities and like journalists and stuff who left the evil mainstream media and are now fighting the good fight for the truth on social media, and they all want you to sign up to their Substack so they can send you emails on a constant basis, right? Telling you of the latest thing that you got to read that they wrote, or the latest video you got to watch that they made. I also collect emails on my website, but people can call and they can sign up for updates. And I've always resisted doing a monthly newsletter. I've always resisted. Even when I make a new video, I put that new video on YouTube. I don't send an email to everybody on my email list, letting them know that there's a new YouTube video. Maybe I should, but I don't. Maybe that makes me stupid. Maybe that makes me crazy. All I know is that I'm told not to do it. Is that, they signed up for whatever reason they signed up. Maybe they do want updates. Maybe, and if I post a blog article, well, it automatically sends an update. But I haven't written blog articles in a while. But anyway, we're getting off topic. The point is that the paradox is that the more our mechanical nature wants to assert itself, which means to control and dominate our decision-making process, to control and dominate our thinking process, to control and dominate our desires. In other words, to possess us and our precious human resources in order to be, so that we be this person. I know, and I'm this, and I am that, and I'm in charge of my life, and so on. The more that mechanical process asserts itself in order to be, the more we are not being. the more we are living in Maya, which is Sanskrit for illusion. The deeper we are digging ourselves into the matrix, the more we are selling our soul to the devil. Because if you pay attention and you give your vital energy, right, the energy that is required, the vital energy, the sexual energy, the creative force, the more that you give your creative force to your mechanical nature, and the more you give your consciousness, you pay attention to what it has to say to you and what it has to show you and what it has to comment on and what it tells you is true or not true about your experience, the more you pay attention and give your creative energies to that mechanical aspect of your nature, the more you are selling yourself, your soul, your being, you're selling your being short. Those precious, vital human resources are there to help create the human soul, the solar bodies. So if you're giving away your attention, you're paying attention, you're giving away that energy to your mechanical nature, you are selling your soul. That is the metaphysical, scientific origin of that expression, to sell your soul. What does it mean to sell your soul or selling out? It means you are choosing not to be. You are choosing a temporary, illusory existence. You are making the choice that Cypher makes in the first Matrix movie when he sells out his friends, when he sells out Morpheus and Trinity and Neo. Why? So he can have the AIs reinsert him into the Matrix. And there's that beautiful scene where he's sitting and he's saying, and he's got a rare steak on the end of his fork, and he says, I know that this steak is not real. I know that the Matrix is just telling my mind that it is juicy and delicious. And you know what? He takes a bite and he goes, he says, ignorance is bliss. Okay. Pause, because we've got a bunch of comments, and I have not been ignoring your comments. Rest assured, we are going to get to them one by one. And the first one was from Ken Numi. He says, I would recommend simplifying things. Matthew 18, chapter 18, verse 2. And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of, let me start this again. And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them, 3. And he said, that's the verse number. Okay. And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them and said, truly, I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He says, sorry to interrupt, but I just comment on what comes to mind. And Proverbs chapter 3 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Also, be not of this world. Yeah, Ken Numi, I imagine your comment was longer than this. You just need to know that the StreamYard's platform that I use, and or is it Facebook or YouTube? Anyway, there's a limit to how long you can make comments. I'm not sure if it's what's the limiting factor, if it's StreamYards or if it's which one, but so if you want to repost your comment with the second half, Benjamin Raphael, for instance, has learned this the hard way. So we have a comment that's in 3 parts from him. But in response to what you're saying, yeah, no, it's you weren't interrupting, and of course, the thing about being childlike and being humble and yeah, putting trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Sure. And I appreciate you suggesting that we need to simplify things. But the reason why I'm devoting the time here today on this topic is precisely because if we oversimplify things, we will fail. Because if you underestimate the adversary will defeat you. And you might say, no, I put my faith and trust in the Lord, and the devil is never going to be more powerful than Jesus. But it is precisely those kinds of oversimplifications that cause us to fail. Because look to the Passion Play, look to the events of Good Friday, look to what the man was to become the incarnated Christ, look to the mysteries of Golgotha, look to what he endured that day, and count how many times he fell. Look to the fact that the Roman soldiers had to draw Simon out of the crowd to help him carry his cross. Listen to the words, oh God, why have you forsaken me? That he called out in a moment of agony and humiliation and humanity. We are all challenged at whatever level we are at. Because what is the point to play a game? What is the point? On the Alm of Life, you must be challenged, and the challenge must be formidable. It must be in line with your capacity and your potential, because it is only by overcoming that challenge of a significant intensity and of a significant nature that we can then embody our true nature. That is divinity's purpose. Divinity's purpose is to overcome. But divinity is not here. Your innermost divinity, your divine nature is not here to overcome something easy. What's the point of that? Remember what JFK said about going to the moon. We pledge to do this and the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. People don't climb easy mountains. Mountain climbers and deep sea divers, free divers, wildlife photographers, artists, creatives, musicians of every kind. They face enormous challenges that are appropriate to their level of talent and that they are appropriate to the work that they are here to do. And that's why so many so-called great men, whether they be malevolent or benevolent, these human beings that had enormous potential or enormous consequence on the earth, they were facing this challenge, this struggle between the two different, the conflicting purposes of divine and mechanical nature, and they were being bounced around between being and not being. If you get it into your head that good always wins, well, you're obviously not paying attention. And you're obviously not paying attention not only to yourself, because you have to be honest with yourself. You can't bullshit yourself. And you haven't been paying attention to the world around you. So, yes, it's good to be simplify, and I try, and one of the things that these live streams are for is for me to paint the big broad strokes and the big mosaic and the big picture. And then later over time, I refine it and refine it and refine it and refine it and simplify it until eventually I can land on some very simple but powerful, deep and meaningful symbol or allegory or explanation. Exactly the way Master Jesus taught when he said, you must be, like a child, and trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Okay, yes. And that was fine and appropriate 2,000 years ago. But much has happened and much has changed since then. And we live in a very different world. And so, with all of the confusion and all of the complexity around us, we have to be able to reveal truths that are so subtle and nuanced and clever. And again, all of this will become clear later on in today's talk. But thank you for your comment. Benjamin says, nowadays, during both personal time and work time, there are so many distractions competing for our attention that drain our energy. This creates a deficit of energy that we need to pay attention to our Divine Father. It is sad, and I'm not exempt from this as well. It's funny you mentioned that. You know that in the 80s, they invented the cubicle, and they had all of these farms, these cubicle farms, right? These offices, uh, they had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these cubicles. And then sometime in the 2000s, corporations started throwing out all those cubicles, and they started moving to these shared spaces and open office spaces without the cubicles, because it would allow for more collaboration and for more openness. It was more social. It was supposedly the psychologists convinced the companies that this would make people more productive. Well, of course, it resulted in anything but. People became far less productive, and so the workplace became, oh yeah, a lot more fun, but also, exactly as you said, not just unproductive, but distracting. And the people trying to work, trying to focus, so now everybody has earbuds in, desperately, like listening to like certain harmonic frequencies and meditation music and whatever, trying desperately to focus on their work and get their work done, but they're constantly being interrupted, as you said. And just imagine it in like a work environment like that. Anyway, Benjamin continues. He says, as Madonna said in her song Material Girl, we live in a material world. Yes, we do. But there is divinity behind it, right? Yeah, we are living in a material world, and she might be a material girl, which is ridiculously ironic given the name that she gave herself. But for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, remember, the divine potter works with the clay that's been thrown on the wheel. None of us is forsaken, and this humanity has not been forsaken or abandoned. And that the symbol of the lotus flower and the rose, like the lotus flower blooms in the darkest, murkiest swamp. That's out of which blooms the lotus. And roses, it turns out, you grow roses in manure. You grow roses in shit. Ask someone who grows roses for a living and they'll tell you. So out of the shit, out of the dung heap, out of the manure grows the king of all flowers, right? The symbol of love itself. And that thorny stem, because that's why the rose is the rose, and the Rosicrucians chose the rose and the cross, because Jesus is the rose on the cross. The Christ is the rose on the cross. And that's why he has the crown of thorns on his head, because the rose cannot grow without the stem of thorns. These are powerful symbols, but all of that grows out of the dung heap, the manure, the shit, which is the mountain called Golgotha, right? Christ redeems through his death and resurrection the sins of the earth. Christ is born and dies and is born again out of the mound of Golgotha, which is a heaping mound of the world's shit. This is the mystery of Golgotha. That the divinity is born and comes into this world through hell itself. And this is an absolute truth that is embodied in the analogous ultimate methodology, in Aum, that you see in the symbol that I keep referring to. That's on, and remember, the X, right, is the cross, is the Christ. It is the Christ that upholds. That's also Attlas, by the way, who upholds the pillars of heaven and earth. And is the Christ is the God force, the Logos in activity, and that activity is the activity of Aum, that spiral pattern. And if the God is to know himself, or the Christ is to incarnate, the Christ must descend into hell and conquer the mechanical forces therein before he can ascend and be born again, a Christified master. The phoenix rising from the ashes must be consumed in the hellfire first. One cannot awaken and be born into reality, into objective sight, right? True enlightenment, unless one goes through the mechanical carnival funhouse of illusions, right? The house of illusions. You know those, the house of mirrors. Have you seen those in the carnivals? And they're all filled with these crazy psychedelic mirrors and stuff, and it's all like these weird twisted angled rooms, and it's all there to discombobulate you. And then when you come out of that, you feel like really like strangely grounded. And when you finally step outside and you return to this normalcy of this reality that you're familiar with, you're like, wow, it's like going through all that weirdness carnival funhouse, you come out the other side and you feel more grounded than you did before, because all of that disruption and obstruction and the rocking of the boat and the making you question reality and making you see things that weren't real, and all of that mesmerizing, hypnotic, illusory effects on your consciousness creates this recalibration process when you actually come out the other side. This is why you feel better after you work out, after you exercise. This is why you feel better after you meditate. This is why you feel better after you cook a home cooked meal for yourself. Or when you go out and do yard work or any kind of physical, or when you clean your house. And then afterwards you sit down and you finally relax and you return to equilibrium after doing this heavy work, this hard work. But now you're like, you feel so much better for it. Your garden is beautiful now. Your home is clean, right? Or your body has been exercised, or your body has been fed, and so all of that hard work and effort comes back, and you experience and you recognize that you are better for it. And we'll get into that in more detail in just a bit. Benjamin says, I listen to your live streams because you're the only person I've come across who speaks about metaphysical science in this way. Others often talk about spirituality, but their perspectives still seem closely tied to materialism. I imagine that those ties to materialism relate to manifesting desires and manifesting the life that you want. Okay. And but before we continue, Azazel says, hello, Azazel. Nice to have you here. You're welcome to be here. Coming back to this, a moment ago, I said that we were going to cover how exertions of effort, it's right in the Bible, right? You reap what you sow. The more you invest in terms of energy and effort, the more benefit you will get from that. If you invest in yourself, it's an investment in yourself. Practice makes perfect, in other words. If you spend the time and make the effort, you will improve, you will develop. The energy and the effort that you put into practicing is going to pay dividends. The dividends will be you will become better at whatever it is that you're practicing. So this brings me to J.D. Salinger and the movie The Writer in the Rye. So it's about young J.D. Salinger before he was well known. Prior to the First World War, and he actually met Una, and I can't remember her last name, but it was Una Meyer, I believe. Is it Meyer? I'm going to cheat and do some quick research. Okay, so hopefully the answer will come quick. Okay. Yes, so her name was Una O'Neill, and she was the daughter of the famous Nobel Prize winning playwright named Eugene O'Neill. And so J.D. Salinger began dating her prior to the First World War, but then he went off to war. And while he was overseas in Europe, fighting in Europe, Una met Charlie Chaplin and fell in love, and Charlie Chaplin married her. So that was one of several sort of life-changing events that happened to him, and he had he had shell shock from the First World War, although it's not explored in those terms in that detail in the film. but he was a writer. The point is that he was a writer, and the movie, The Writer in the Rye, uh, that's really what the story is about. Is J.D. Salinger's life work, his passion to write, and he has this college professor played by Kevin Spacey who asks him, and he says, because Salinger wants to get published, like every author who writes, he wants to be published, because why would you write if if not to be published? And I just want to get you the exact quote here because it's significant. If I can get Windows to cooperate. And of course I can't. Let me move back over here. Speaking of mind rot viruses and whatnot, Windows 11 is an absolute travesty. But in any case, I want to just scroll up and find where is it? Okay, so I can't seem to find the quote, so let's not worry about that. I'll just have to paraphrase it the best I can. This college professor says to Salinger, he says, you have to ask yourself, would I still write if I got no benefit out of it? He says, if you can answer that question truthfully and honestly, then you're a writer. If you got no benefit from your writing, none whatsoever. So the implication is that if you spent the rest of your life writing and never got published, would you still do it? And over the course of events of Salinger's life, he goes off to war, he loses his fiance to Charlie Chaplin, he comes back, he's shell-shocked, but the whole time he was writing. And he was writing this character and this story that eventually becomes the book, The Catcher in the Rye, and it gets published. And he becomes an overnight sensation. He becomes an overnight success. And he has a writing agent and publishers and everything else. And so they're all waiting for his next book, and et cetera, et cetera. And the story unfolds from there. But J.D. Salinger is still living with the trauma from the war and the fallout from the shell shock that he can't seem to shake. It keeps encroaching on his psychology, on his mind, and it causes him terrible suffering and inability to work. But he stumbles upon it's never clear exactly if he's a Hindu guru or a Buddhist priest, but he finds himself meeting someone who starts teaching him the art of meditation. And so J.D. Salinger starts practicing meditation in order to quiet his mind and achieve calm and so on. But probably because the meditation that he was being taught did not include meditating on egos, right? The identification and comprehension of the sources of his suffering. He was doing it to manage symptoms of his suffering, to feel better, to be able to work, to be able to write. And in the course of the film, he ends up taking the proceeds from the gangbuster sales of his book, because like I said, his book becomes a bit of a phenomenon. Even if you haven't read The Catcher in the Rye, you've heard the title. Even if you don't know J.D. Salinger by name, the author by name, it doesn't matter. You've read The Catcher in the Rye. Maybe you've watched movies based on it. But eventually, Salinger, he starts becoming very uncomfortable with the fame, and people start showing up dressed as the character from his book. And these forlorn and hapless, hopeless men start coming to him dressed as the character from the book, saying that your book gave me hope. Your book was a revelation. Your book allowed me to reinvent myself or reinvent my life. And I was hapless. I was hopeless. Because remember, this is also during the depression years. And so a lot of men were down on their luck. A lot of men were going through a lot of suffering. And so this character who's again, the name of the protagonist eludes me because I'm so terrible with name. I'll get it for you in a second here. You know, this is the one thing that AI is good for using these, like, for getting these trivial matters. Is Holden Caulfield. Holden Caulfield. Okay, so in many ways, The Catcher in the Rye served the men of the time and the young men of the time, and this character of Holden Caulfield served a role in society not unlike the role that Jordan Peterson has been serving for young men in this day and age, where through the writing and through the experience of this Holden Caulfield character, young men who are suffering from, unemployment, no prospects, living with their parents or living on the street or living wherever, however they could, job to job and so on and so forth, they could project themselves and live vicariously through this character of Holden Caulfield, keeping in mind that that character and his heroic journey was being written by a man who was going through the First World War and the loss of his fiancée, who was at the time one of the world's most famous actors. So, in other words, Salinger poured himself into Caulfield and all of his suffering and all of his psychological torment and chaos and confusion got poured into the character of Holden Caulfield, and that made that expression meaningful and purposeful for literally millions of young men across America who saw themselves and their suffering in this character. And it was a cathartic experience to read Catcher in the Rye for them, because it was a way for them, because this was the 1920s and 30s in United States. This was like, there's no therapy. there was no internet, there was no psychology for men. It was like you tough it out. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps and all that kind of stuff. And so Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye was a process of catharsis for J.D. Salinger, and as such became an artifact that allowed others to experience their own cathartic process by reading it, by reading the book and engaging with that character and his psychology and his catharsis. But, and Azazel says, Jordan Peterson's suffering has been obvious. Yeah, I mean, well, we can get into that. That's a side issue, but I agree wholeheartedly. And listen, J.D. Salinger, the next J.D. Salinger did not exorcise all of his demons in Catcher in the Rye, because as these young men came up to him, and you can see, we'll come and talk about Jordan Peterson, one of the things that will break Jordan Peterson every time is when he talks about young men who come up to him on the street to thank him personally for changing their lives and for giving them hope. When Jordan Peterson relays these stories in his talks or in his podcasts, when he's a guest on other people's podcasts, he starts to choke up. It brings tears to his eyes because he is overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed with emotion that his work that he becomes at once, it brings him joy, but it also breaks his heart that these young, disaffected, forgotten, ignored, neglected young men that society and postmodernism has decided to shit all over and to discard with completely unceremoniously, just reject and discard like worn underwear, that they're so desperate and they're so aching and longing and hungry for a strong male masculine presence in their life with wisdom and knowledge and practical guidance and practical strategies and that can help them arrive at meaning and purpose again. And that when these young men come to him and say that this is what you gave me and I have meaning and purpose and direction in my life again, whereas before I was lost, I was listless, I was abandoned and forgotten, you showed me the light. You were the lighthouse that saved me from oblivion on the rocks, right, on the shores. And so this breaks Jordan. Jordan can't handle it. He breaks down in tears, partly in joy, partly in sorrow. That is such a tragedy. Now we can experience that. We can see that. This is a fact. I'm not making this up. You can look up videos of Jordan Peterson breaking down in tears, talking about the men who approach him to thank him for changing their lives. But guess what? Exactly the same thing happened with J.D. Salinger. That young men in the middle of the Depression were coming to him, disaffected, unemployed, listless, directionless young men were coming to him saying that his book changed their lives and that his character of Holden Caulfield renewed their sense of hope and gave them new direction and gave them new opportunity, and et cetera, et cetera. And just like Jordan Peterson, J.D. Salinger couldn't handle it. He got very emotional, but he thought that he was getting his emotions and his psychology under control with meditation, but clearly, um, Master Samael talks about this, the dangers of isolation and meditation and isolation and cutting yourself off from the world. He says anybody can achieve equanimity and peace alone in their bedroom, meditating. He says, but that's not the test. That doesn't prove anything. You got to get out into the world because the world will test you. Other people will test you, right? Your family, your friends, your coworkers, complete strangers, people on the highway, they are going to test you. They're going to test your patience. They're going to test your resilience. They're going to test your compassion. They're going to test your understanding. They're really going to put you to the test, right? Because they're going to put your feet to the fire. Have you really connected yourself to that divine foundation, that unshakable higher self that is able to stand and confront and face whatever life throws at you? Or do you go batshit crazy and lose control and lose, and become angry or upset or impatient and frustrated and and then you just got to get the hell out of there, or you lash out, you become confrontational, reactive, mechanical, et cetera, et cetera. So JD Salinger decided that he doesn't want to deal with this. Yeah, so I knew that you were going to bring this up, the medical conditions. Let's not go there right now. That's another issue. But yeah, he's suffered a lot. But anyway, we can talk more about that. Unfortunately, he possibly has been turning to, in his desperation, he's been turning to some who are possibly taking advantage of his dire medical condition. And again, I don't want to get into this right now because it's a distraction, but it's also a grift. So it relates to the talk from 2 weeks ago. But anyway, maybe if we have time later, we'll circle back around to this point. So JD Salinger decides that he really is going to detach himself and get away from all of the noise and all the distractions and all of these people who are coming and they're disturbing his peace by wanting to thank him and wanting to, and he doesn't want the fame. He doesn't want any of that. He just wants to write, but he can't write with all the distractions and with his upset psychology. So what does he do? He buys a place in is it Connecticut or the Hamptons, 93 acres in the forest, and there's a log cabin, a house, and a separate building that he uses for his office where he can meditate and can write completely undisturbed. And his new wife and child, he moves them all out there, and he starts writing prolifically. Eventually, they divorce him because he pays no attention to them. He doesn't want to pay attention to them. He doesn't want to be distracted from his writing. And he takes so much to heart what this college professor told him. You only be a real writer if you're willing to spend the rest of your life writing and never getting any benefit out of it. He ends up living the rest of his life as a recluse, as a notorious recluse. He never publishes another book. Not while he was alive, anyway. I don't know what happened to his works after he died. The movie's a little bit vague on that, but He spent the rest of his life shacked up in the woods writing, and he never published anything ever again. Now, why does this matter, or why do I bring this up? Because the college professor had the best of intentions to say to a young man who is focused only on being published, to say to him, he says, but a true writer doesn't care about being published, doesn't care about the benefit that he's going to get for his writing. A true writer focuses on the writing. And you only know, if you're a true writer, if this really is your calling, if this really is your purpose, if you're willing to write the rest of your life and get no benefit from it. And do you see the problem that when that someone's calling to be a writer, as much as that professor had good intentions, he ended up poisoning J.D. Salinger with an inverted mechanical purpose. Where a divine inspiration and a life of suffering that produced Catcher in the Rye, that ended up being this prolific book that ends up on reading lists, mandatory reading lists, and on bestseller lists 100 years after it was published. And it's helped countless young men, and it's considered to be one of the preeminent, perhaps the preeminent novel, American novel of the 20th century. And for that reason, the estate of J.D. Salinger has been getting residuals, right, royalties, for that one book ever since. But the heart and the mind, the soul, the spirit of the man that produced that book would never produce another. He did. He would produce countless books. We don't know how many books he wrote, but he never shared them with the world, because this well-meaning professor put it into his head that he shouldn't care if he publishes or not. Now, J.D. Salinger is a postmodernist hero, an anti-capitalist. He's a pure artist, a pure art for art's sake. Was it? And it's unquestionable, undeniable that this was a divinely ordained purpose, right? This was the purpose of his life, was to be a writer and to go through that suffering and to go to the First World War and to come up with Holden Caulfield and write that book, write that story. That was part of his purpose, absolutely, to be a writer and to perform that psychological work on himself through this character and through his writing, and the tremendous benefit that proved to be for so many. This was divine purpose for J.D. Salinger to be a writer. But a writer of one book? No, he wasn't a writer of one book. He was a writer of dozens of books, but only one that the rest of the world got to read. Now, you might say, well, maybe he was only meant to write that one book. Well, if that's true, why did he cloister himself in a cabin in the woods and spend the rest of his life writing? Clearly, he was meant to write. And clearly, he was writing, and this was very, very important to him. This was his purpose for being. And however he was developing spiritually was related to his writing, his life's purpose, his. But do you not see the problem? Do you not see how that divine purpose, that divine meeting, was ironically expropriated, used and abused by his false self, his ego, by mechanical nature? And how? Exactly by following that advice of, quote, not getting any benefit. By not publishing, by not being, quote, selfish, by not worrying about what other people think or getting published, or right, without worrying about, by abandoning the business side and focusing purely on the art, on the writing itself, his own mechanical nature, his own ego got the best of both worlds. And all of that for himself, and that peace and quiet of the cabin, and not being harassed by fans anymore, and not having to deal with the emotional stress and anxiety of young men approaching him on the street to thank him. He shut it all out in the cabin in the woods, where all he did was meditate and write, meditate and write, meditate and write. And nobody benefited from it. Just him. The irony of ironies. By following the advice, would you write the rest of your life if you got no benefit from it? And his answer was yes, but to him, to benefit from it was to make money and get published and become famous. He thought by rejecting all of that, now he was being completely selfless and the true artist, focusing only on the writing without any benefit. But do you not see the clever and insidious twist that his ego did? Because that was what he wanted. That was the benefit. He didn't want to deal with other people. He didn't want to really grow. He didn't want to really face his demons and exercise his demons. He wanted to relish in and indulge in them, and have all of that psychological stress and pain and suffering create incredible narratives, incredible characters. But he didn't want to be actually tested out in the world anymore. And whatever benefit he was getting for himself as an artist, as a writer, psychologically, writing constantly, incessantly for the rest of his life that nobody has ever read, has never been published. No one else has benefited. He robbed the world of his voice, which was not his voice, but the voice of his innermost, the true writer. And he did that because out of piety, out of humility, and out of a belief that this is what a real artist and a real writer does. And that this is what it means to be true to his passion of writing. This is such a powerful case study in something that Master Samael wrote about in his book, Igneous Rose. And hang on, where are you here? Where are we here? Where are we here? You guys went away. Oh, there we go. Okay. So let's okay, share screen, also share tab audio. Entire screen. Okay. And this is a video that I made about this topic. Let's make this bigger so we have no distractions. So actually, why don't we do that? Okay. So I'll read this out to you as we play this. Let's make sure that it's on the right speed. Okay. It says, I know many brethren who fight indescribably to correct their defects and to purify themselves. Yet they do not remember others. They feel alone. They fight for their own spiritual progress and for their moral self-development. However, they do not remember that they have brothers and sisters. And that all of us are children of the same mother. Their spirituality is selfish spirituality. Therefore, the masters do not owe them anything. There is nothing to pay them because nothing is owed to them. They do not assist anyone. They do not sacrifice themselves for anyone, nor do they fight for the spirituality of anyone. Every initiation is a payment that must be given to the person. Yet if nothing is owed to the human being, then nothing is given to him. Therefore, even if he screams and cries out asking for an initiation, he will become old before receiving it. J.D. Salinger, by falling for the well-intentioned but erroneous belief that by cloistering himself off from the world, focusing purely on writing and not on publishing, he would accomplish his life's work and fulfill his divine purpose of being a pure, unadulterated writer. And in doing so, he fell into the trap that Master Samael is talking about here in Igneous Rose, the trap of selfish spirituality. Because no one could benefit anymore from his work. He shut out the rest of the world, and he cut off all those young men who had approached him and harassed him and hassled him and disturbed his equilibrium and took away from him his peace. So he retreated, like all those ascetic yogis in India and elsewhere around the world that go and live in caves or at the top of the mountain, and they live there 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years in caves or in mountains, believing that they're enlightened and believing that they're communing one with the universe and everything. But they are selfish. Exactly as Master Samael described. They're not helping anybody. They're not working for anybody's spirituality. And neither was J.D. Salinger. He wrote the one book, and that's it. And he was living off the royalties for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, he was whatever. He might have been writing incredibly intense, psychologically deep, profound, cathartic works. We'll never know. And who knows? Countless generations have benefited from reading his one book. How many more people might he have helped? Now, maybe none. Maybe the rest of his writing was shit. Maybe he really only was meant to write the one book and have one book published. But the key here, and the reason why I'm using this case study, is because my friend Eduardo told me I have to watch this movie. And so let's bring it back to the significance in what the eyes to see and the ears to hear have to say about this particular case study. That I too am here on a path, on a journey with a divine purpose. I too have written a book. Well, I've actually written two books, but one was 14 years ago and on different topics. But on the topic of spirituality, I've written one book, What in Hell is With Us? And that book has sold no copies, right? It's not a phenomenon. It's not gone viral. I don't have people coming up to me in the streets telling me that I've changed their lives. I'm nowhere. There's 8 of you watching right now. Not hundreds, not thousands. And I thought that I had gotten over the desire for outcomes and the desire to control outcomes, which is fear's way of manipulating and possessing us, and worrying about how many people have bought the book or read the book or so on and so forth. I thought I had gotten over all of that. And as I was in the depths of depression last week and really, really in hell, I was like, am I really doing this for others, or am I doing it for me? Is the demon still trying to ride the coattails of my innermost being? Am I still trying to have my cake and eat it too? In other words, in my belief that no, I'm not worried about the benefits to me, am I becoming like a J.D. Salinger, only in the reverse? But the same fact applies. We cannot underestimate the adversary. And the paradox of being and not being, the fact of the matter is that in order to be, if we are here being, then that means we are here to serve others. We are here to be selfless. But to serve others, to be selfless and serve others, there's a need, if you will, for others to receive what we have to offer, what we have to give. If we are here to serve others, there must be a benefit to others that they can accrue, that they can actually benefit from, and that they can reap the rewards. In other words, it's not only that you reap what you sow, but others reap what you sow. You pay it forward. And it's in this video of Master Samael about selfish spirituality. Selfless spirituality, and ego can get in there and get its claws and ride the coattails of selflessness and try to exploit selflessness. And impose the desire for outcomes and graft that desire to control and dominate those outcomes to the divine purpose of selflessness. So the selfishness, it's not aligned. It grafts itself. It clings to the back like a tick clinging to the back of a dog, right? And using that dog like its own Greyhound bus. And maybe that's why the Greyhound is the Greyhound bus's logo. But you see, that ego in me, that demon in me, that fear, that desire to control and dominate, I haven't gotten rid of that. And I thought that I had divorced it from my work by including other things, like including a free PDF download on my website of my book. You can buy the book, of course, certainly, but in addition to that, you can download it for free from my website. And I thought, by not doing the newsletters and not worrying about making YouTube shorts and not worrying, because remember too that a month before my book came out, I don't know if you recall this, I certainly do. A month before I self-published my book, a couple years ago now, I had a YouTube, I had a Facebook account with over 10,000 followers. And a month before I published my book, that account got hacked and Facebook locked it down. That account was called Attlas Information, like it had the same name as my YouTube channel. And the funny thing is that it's still, you can still find it on YouTube, or I keep saying that. You can still find it on Facebook. Hang on a second. Let's go. No. I want to go to the search. If you go to, you can say Attlas Information. Okay, 9.2 thousand followers. The last post was May 8th, 2019, it seems, for whatever reason. And this is locked down. I can't get into this. I can't access this account because it got hacked. And they deleted a bunch of posts as well, and so on. And I had spent years building up that following to help me to market the book and have an audience to receive that book, right? Which is one of the sort of best practices that they were telling to budding authors and whatever, is that you can't get an agent or a publisher if you don't have a significant following on social media. So me, like JD Salinger, I was worried about getting published, and that my account getting hacked and me losing access to all those followers, that really, was a kick in the pants. But as I meditated on it and I went through it at that time, it was because it was a lesson. It was the world. It was my divine mother teaching me the lesson that the college professor was trying to teach JD Salinger, which is, you're here to do this work, but you can't allow yourself to become attached to the outcome. Because if you think that tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people are going to be buying your book, and that the things that you talk about are going to be on everybody's lips, like that you're going to somehow, like, that's, you can't allow yourself to identify with that and become attached to that, because what that means is your mechanical nature is going to try and abscond with that divine purpose, and it's going to try to exploit and make your divine purpose into its own purpose, which is to be rich and famous and popular and admired and revered, and people coming up to you and thanking you. You changed their lives. And in other words, it's your mechanical nature is going to want to be the center of attention. And your mechanical nature, your ego, your false self, is going to try and turn your divine life's work into its benefit, for its benefit. And that's what the college professor says to JD Salinger. Your divine work is not here for your benefit. Would you still do it? But as well-intentioned as that advice was, he failed JD Salinger. And thank God, right? I had, among other things, this quote from Master Samael on selfish spirituality. And thank God that my impulse to do this work always came from a place of selflessness. always came from a place of, I'm here to show, I'm here to give, I'm here to serve. And there's another quote, which, let me, this is one of my favorite quotes from any modern piece of media, and the source is rather, it's rather surprising. It's just a matter of me finding it. Here it is. Let's just put this over here. Okay. And if I make that bigger, okay. Where are we now? Let us, this should be fine. Okay. So the quote here is, this is Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast. And I've gone through, the esoteric symbology of Beauty and the Beast before. And, Lumiere is, he has he's a candlestick, but he has the three candles, right? So she's a trinity, he's a triunity. So the three candles representing the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And within us, it represents hum, manas, and being. And the quote is, life is so unnerving for a servant who's not serving. He's not whole without a soul to wait upon. And that whole song from the musical and from the cartoon, from the animation, be our guest. Be our guest, be our guest, put our service to the test. And what's fascinating is that alchemically and esoterically, metaphysically, the curse that was put on the castle because of selflessness turned all the servants and occupants of the castle into inanimate objects, into things, into machines. Like Cogsworth is a clock, Mrs. Potts is a kettle, and Lumiere is a candlestick. Now Lumiere, of course, with the Trinity and stuff, is like there's symbolism here. And Mrs. Potts, the Divine Mother, boiling water in a kettle, that's what you use. And kettle infuses tea, that's a transmutation. So the sexual alchemy of the feminine force, as the fire applies to it. So like Lumiere's fire meets Mrs. Potts' water, and she boils, right, in a kettle. So they are transformed into machines, but the divine is still there. The divine spark is still there. And of course, the prince is transformed into a beast, an animal, primal, instinctive, reactive, mechanical version of himself because of selflessness. And it is Belle. Her name means beauty. And from the final couplet of John Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you can know in life and all you need to know. Belle is beauty. Beauty comes into their life, and beauty is truth. And through that truth and through that beauty, the prince learns how to love again. He learns selflessness. He learns sacrifice. And it is beautiful. And beauty loves to see service and sacrifice. And so he is transformed back into a prince, and all of the mechanical servants regain their true human form, and they all become human again because of truth, because of beauty. And they all are truly willing to realize their purpose of service now. Life is so unnerving for a servant who's not serving. He's not whole without a soul to wait upon. You see, I was blessed by having access to such wisdom prior to having my account frozen. But this last bout of depression forced me to look deeper and closer at myself, and this longing to be of service, and this longing to serve, this longing to fulfill my life's work, and this longing to be a conduit and a messenger and a stenographer for my innermost Attlas and beyond, our Lord and Master, the being of beings, Alux, all light and godlight. I was forced to look long and hard in myself, and the Writer in the Rye, the film about J.D. Salinger, provided me his life, not his character in his book, although I've never read it. I've never read the book. But I didn't need the cathartic experience of the character in the book. For me, the cathartic experience was the writer of the book. In other words, the meta story of the book. And in the examination of the meta story of the book, I saw a divine purpose being absconded, expropriated, exploited, and inverted with such subtlety and skill and cleverness that it became a case of selfish spirituality. And because depression is deep-seated subconscious anger and rage, it's when the demon is not getting his way. And so me being denied the opportunity to serve in a way that for me being made to wait before that opportunity to serve and begin my life's work in earnest, me being forced to wait and have that denied me right now, you see, that triggered the entity that wants to ride that train and ride those coattails, who wants to control and dominate, who wants that outcome, means that I have not yet separated myself. I have not yet divorced my divine purpose from my demon's mechanical purpose. They are one and the same. They are overlapping. They are two sides of the same coin. The problem with that is that I cannot do justice to my being if I'm simultaneously empowering the illusion, the not being? This is the paradox. This is the puzzle that I have to care about serving, about not being selfish, but the source of my selfishness has grafted itself onto the purpose of my innermost source of selflessness, just as it did with J.D. Salinger. And with some bad advice from a well-meaning professor, his mechanical purpose, which is selfish, was able to be and exert itself in such a way that it imprisoned his divine purpose to being. And it was like this very clever compromise where the mechanical desire to be, to gain benefit, to exploit the divine purpose of being a writer, it said, okay, I know what we'll do. We'll create a false narrative based on this advice from that professor that we admired so much when he said a real writer doesn't care about gaining any benefit from what he writes. We're going to equate that with publishing. And we're going to create, so we'll create this narrative, this illusion that you can be a real writer just by writing. And you don't have to worry about, and you won't be getting any benefit from it because you won't be publishing. So you will satisfy the intuitive and selflessness of divine purpose by this illusion that you've abandoned selfishness by not publishing. But it's a lie. It's a grift. Because in the process of not publishing, J.G. Salinger didn't give up his selfishness by denying others the ability to read his books. He gave up selflessness by doing that. But it was packaged as him giving up his selfishness, because by denying others the benefit of his divine gift, he was denying others the benefit. And the benefit that he got was he got to live like a cloistered monk in a wooden shack in the middle of the forest, doing what he loved, which is writing. He was doing what his being wanted him to do, but it was selfish spirituality. It was all just for him, for his own development, for his own spiritual growth, and for his own peace and quiet and seclusion, and not being bothered and not being obstructed and distracted by everyone and everything around him, and the fame and the notoriety which he hated. He just wanted to be left alone. He just wanted to be left alone. And he kept that divine gift for himself. And by not publishing, his mind, his mechanical nature was able to create this narrative, thanks to that college professor, that by not publishing, he was sacrificing the benefits to him, that he was being selfless by not publishing. And it was the exact opposite. It was double speak. But J.D. Salinger heard and believed what he wanted to. He didn't want to face the uncomfortable encounters with young men coming up to him on the street to thank him for changing their lives. He didn't want to go through the suffering and sacrifice that Jordan Peterson expresses when he breaks down in tears. J.D. Salinger didn't want to deal with that. Okay, so he selfishly cloistered himself away from the world and denied and cut the world off from his divine gifts. But he did so under this narrative that he was being selfless. And all of this was like a mirror for me to say, am I really being selfless? Or is some kind of narrative am I under the illusion of selflessness, but am I really falling into the trap of selfishness? Is this really just all about me? So earlier, Ken Numi said, I recommend simplifying things and being like a child and trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Okay. But do you see now how complex and sophisticated and complicated and paradoxical it's not so cut and dry, and it's not so simple as to say, I'm just going to connect with my innermost child, and I'm just going to be childlike. Well, that's what J.D. Salinger did. He wanted to be left alone. He wanted to be a little kid in his room upstairs playing with his toys. Right? And there's nothing more selfish than that for one who is here with a divine purpose to serve and to give and to share their gifts with the world. And that's the hard truth. But I am here sharing my gifts with the world. And it's the inability to share these gifts with more people that is the source of my depression, the source of the demon's anger and frustration. I thought I was over it, but clearly I wasn't. I'm not, because something inside of me isn't. And that means that should success ever come my way, and should I ever find myself on stages or on podcasts or at book signings or speaking publicly to groups of I don't know how many people, this constant companion of mine that is going to be trying to grift and exploit and feed off of and leech off of that success and that experience for itself, it's going to want to try and leverage that to control and dominate others and to control and dominate outcomes out of fear. And in the face of the age that we are in and the way the world is now, you might ask me, well, okay, Attila, that's all fine and dandy, but how did you arrive at this? Like, how did you snap out of the depression, or how did you come to this conclusion? And well, number one, my friend Eduardo directed me to go and watch this movie, and like I said, this movie had a profound effect on me, as serving as a mirror. But additionally, as I've confessed many times, my drug of choice is food. Um, I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I don't gamble. No, you know, and so on and so forth. There's lots of vices out there, but the one that unfortunately I fall victim to, I fall prey to, especially when I'm depressed, is food. So I had pizza, I had ice cream, and I'm talking binging, right? So I'm a big guy, 6'3", over 200 pounds. I have no problems, you know, putting away a couple pints of ice cream, especially when I'm depressed. And but one of the effects that has on me is that if I eat a lot during the day, especially closer to the evening, I will have very, very vivid dreams, because my mind is very active, right? Because of all especially with there's a lot of sugar, that's brain food, and so if the brain is very active on sugar and fat and so on, and carbs, then I have very vivid dreams. And one of the dreams I had in the height, or rather in the depths of my depression, one of the dreams I had was about my late father, who just passed away, a few months ago. And in this dream, I sought to humiliate him. In life, my father was always right. He had to be right. He was always right. He was a know-it-all. I mean, maybe you can tell. Maybe that's who I get it from. My father was always talking, gabbing, and always, telling people how it is. And he had a lot of erroneous ideas, right? So it all came from him most of the time. And so he had a lot of erroneous ideas and theories and beliefs, but he spoke as if they were absolute truths. And it was very difficult sometimes to to listen to him and hear him, because especially when you knew what he was saying was wrong, but you also knew that there was no point in trying to correct him. He was too proud for that. But in this dream, it seems so. He was a control freak as well, right? So that means growing up in my household, my father was the patriarch and he was the control freak. That means I and my demon took a back seat, and we had very little control. My father was very overbearing and dominating and domineering, which is exactly what the demon that lives in me wants to be. In other words, my father was a mirror to the demon that possesses me, and to the person that I was for a long time in life growing up, right? But in this dream, I went out of my way to humiliate my father, to take him down a few pegs, not just a few pegs, but right down into the basement, come crashing down, get him off his high horse and put him in his place, and finally put him in his place. And this happened in the depths of my depression in that dream. In other words, the demon was acting through me in the lunar astral plane. It's in psychological hell. In the depths of my depression, the demon was raging because he didn't have control and dominance over me. And in this dream, he was able to express and his desire to have dominance over my father. And to do that, he humiliated my father. Rather, I humiliated my father in the dream. And when I awoke from that dream, right at the moment, I immediately went into meditation. And I played that scenario out that I had just experienced in my dream. And I was meditating on humiliating others and humiliating my father. And as I've expressed in the past, the family that I was born into and grew up in was very essential to my development because it was a mirror of my shadow self, my dark side, my demon of fear and dominance and control, but it was also a mirror for the world, for these forces of dominance and control that are fear-based, which is why I developed such a profound disdain for the hypocrisy of the church and fear-based religion, which is all about dominance and control and their dogmatic dominance and control of the teachings and so on and so forth. I lived in a microcosm. The first microcosm was my own psychology. The second layer of that microcosm was my family. They were all domineering, overbearing, dominating, and terribly afraid individuals that were a mirror of myself, but they were also a microcosm of the world. So all of this, it's like Russian nesting dolls, right? But the demon revealed his hand. He showed his hand in that dream. In the depths of my depression, I didn't fight it. I gave the demon what he wanted. I gave him the pizza and the ice cream and the chocolate and everything. In the depths of my depression, I went to the drugs that I turned to. I gave the demon what he wanted. I put on like 15, 20 pounds in a week. But in the giving him what he wanted in the astral plane, he was getting what he wanted. He was getting what he wanted. And finally, he showed his hand. What would I do if I was put in a position where I could take someone down a couple notches for my own sake, in order to dominate them, in order to have my way and best them? And this had not occurred to me. This had not entered my mind or my scope of reality since, I don't know, since childhood, since schoolyard bullying and whatnot, and when I was getting bullied, and in the few times in my life when I don't think I've ever, because I've never overtly or consciously, intentionally humiliated anyone or desired to, but that's not true. It's just the story, the narrative that I was convinced of, that I had convinced myself that I don't have that tendency. But in that dream, the demon revealed himself and showed his hand and showed that he would have wanted nothing more than to take the old man and put the old man in his place and humiliate him in front of all of his friends and all of that's when it showed that my demon is more than just fear and dominance control, but that the pride is in there, and narcissism to be the center, but that dominance is the element of that is humiliation, and that actually feeds into it. Like in meditation, this expands out, and this was the key, the secret key that turned in the lock for me, that said that revealed exactly how that demon, that dark side in me, plans to exploit and take advantage of my success. If I am given a platform to share my gifts with the world, my divine purpose is fulfilled, is realized, my demon is going to be there to use that platform and use that truth to humiliate others and is going to try to build himself up by knocking others down and humiliating others. And this has awakened me to a new level of scrutiny and a new level of care and attention with which I deliver truth. Because it's all well and good. You know that I'm a proponent of tough love. And it's all well and good to talk about severity and mercy, that love is severity and mercy in balanced measure. But I must be extra vigilant now that how I deliver the truth, particularly to those who are who are who have erroneous beliefs, or they're not receptive to the truth, or they live their lives differently, they believe different things, and so on and so forth. I can't just bring the hammer down on them and try to hammer the truth into them, because I have to be aware that the adversary is trying at every given moment, at every given opportunity, to humiliate them, and will try to use the objective truth and the gifts that I have to give to people, which is the truth, which is the knowledge and the wisdom and the practical tools that they can use to experience and know the truth for themselves. But I must be wary and conscious that there is something in me that is going to graft itself on there and try to use that truth as its own tool to humiliate others in order to achieve the dominance and control that it desires. And that maybe this is why my previous page of 10,000 followers had to be shut down. And maybe this is why my book is not selling and is not meant to sell. Because maybe if I go and reread that book now, and if I read that book from the point of view of some of the groups that I'm talking about in there, like woke people or conspiracy theorists. You see, I thought if I write the book from my perspective, from the sense of from my experience, saying, look, I used to be a conspiracy theorist. I used to be a wokey back in university. I was studying postmodernism and colonialism and feminism. Okay, I went down in there. I experienced. I know what it's like to be to have these beliefs and to be mesmerized and be hoodwinked and have and identify with being a conspiracy theorist or identify with being a postmodernist. I know what that's like, and I know what it's like to be a techie, right? And be identified with and admiring, virtual reality and video games and AI and all this kind of stuff, right? I thought that by telling my story and by, in a sense, taking the piss out of myself, taking myself down a couple notches, that that I could win the trust of my reader, who I'm trying to communicate with. But if I go back and read that book, maybe I'll find that actually, if I talk to some of these people, they might be very offended and they might feel very humiliated. And it's not, and that maybe I did all of that on purpose because secretly the demon was feeding off of the opportunity to humiliate others and even humiliate this humanity with such a title as what in hell is with us, and such wording as the great awakening of humanity. Well, it would be kind of humiliating for people to hear that. And is that book just an artifact and a piece of evidence that demonstrates this secret, deep longing of my shadow self, this demon that haunts me, uh, to to ascend to a position of dominance and control, and to be heard and to be the center of attention through acts of humiliation, through acts of humiliating others and humiliating the socialists and the wokies and the capitalists and the banksters and these people and those people and all the people that got it all wrong, and materialist science and everybody else. All you people out there who are wrong, let me set you straight. Let me put you in your place and let me enlighten you with the truth. Because that's exactly the kind of attitude and the kind of energy I would get from my dad when he sat me down and said, now listen to me. I'm going to set you straight. I'm going to tell you how it is. There's nothing simple about it. This is clever and subtle and sophisticated. This is just how what's the word? Diabolical our ego can be, our adversary, which wants not so much to hinder and block and prevent us from doing what we came here to do. Yeah, Benjamin, insidious. But like Darth Sidious from the prequel trilogy in Star Wars, he weasels his way, he needles his way in like a like a an intestinal worm, that can actually go up. It's a microscopic worm. It can actually burrow itself in through the sole of your feet, and it'll worm its way through your uh, arteries into the heart, where it might there are things called heartworms that do this, or it will go into the digestive tract, and there start to just feed and grow. And if you've ever seen these worms being pulled out of people, they're meters long. This thing will just keep growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, and they can be inches wide. They can actually fill up. They will keep growing as large as your intestines are, so that everything you eat, and you starve to death. You starve to death because everything you eat goes in. When it enters your intestines, it's actually entering the mouth of the worm, and the worm is digesting it and growing from it. And you're pooping out worm poop, and you get zero benefit, zero nutrition, 0 calories, 0 minerals, nothing. Because the worm has essentially grown and created a new lining to the inside of your intestines. This is not a parasite that's trying to impede you in any way in your daily life. It doesn't want you to stop eating or stop doing what you do. No, it has simply grafted itself onto you, on the inside of you, in order to benefit from everything that you try to eat. And I think there's probably a great deal of wisdom uh, hidden within the study of parasites in nature, because there are countless parasites that have countless strategies for survival and countless ways of exploiting their hosts. And I am certain that by studying parasites in greater detail and all the myriad ways that the different species of parasites uh, feed off of their hosts, and all their different survival strategies and strategies to thrive, I am certain that that the study of that knowledge, of that science, will reap a great deal of insight into the different strategies that our own egos use to siphon our consciousness and energy. But in the same way, if you want, in the same way, you can study economics, you can study politics, you can study advertising, you can study all sorts of ways, and you can study con men and stage magicians and illusionists. And we've often talked about them. And here Benjamin says, I agree, some politicians and elites have parasitic behavior. The study of parasites is very beneficial. And I I think that we will find this to be very true, and that this is the key to solving the puzzle and the paradoxes, the apparent paradoxes where, as in my case, it's not a question of me selling my soul and doing something that I'm not meant to do. It's not a question of the desire of my mechanical nature and the longing of my divine nature. The outcome is the same. They both want the same outcome. That's not what's at issue. That's not what. So for me, it's not as simple as following my Lord and not the understanding of my mind. It's not as simple as how it's expressed in Scripture. We have to go deeper. We have to know ourselves, to know exactly, specifically, scientifically the nature of the grift, so that we are not being bamboozled. Again, taking it back to 2 weeks ago. And so you ask yourself, yeah, but if you're successful and you successfully share your gifts, then you are fulfilling your divine purpose. And so you are being. How can you also not be if you are being? Well, that's because in me, it's a demon. It's a separate entity. It's a parasite that can possess me. And if I share my gifts in such a way that it can condition that sharing so that it feels like it is humiliating others and dominating them through that humiliation, then I will be feeding it and I will be not being. And my being will become not being. In the same way that J.D. Salinger was fulfilling his divine purpose of writing and writing and writing and writing and writing and seeking peace and meditating, all of that was part of his divine purpose. But the one switch, and in me, the switch, the bait and switch was the notion that the best defense is good offense, or in other words, by the self-deprecating approach that I took in my book, was a grift that allowed my demon to use language that would still humiliate others, the people that I was criticizing, or the positions in the. It was double speak. It was double speak. It was a rationalization that if you reveal that you were a member of that group, and you reveal how it took advantage of you, and that you humiliate yourself, you take yourself down a notch, you will be able to say what you need to say without making others feel humiliated, because you've preemptively humiliated yourself. So you've preemptively taken yourself down a couple notches so as not to but so as to disarm your reader, to be able to tell them what they need to hear without them feeling humiliated. But the demon doesn't care if he's humiliating others or me. It just wants to be in that position of telling people what's what. And it just wants to be heard. Sit down and listen to me. I'm going to tell you what's what. And the whole first part of my book was telling my story and all the suffering that I went through in my life in order to validate why I am worthy of being the one who shares the rest of the book, the rest of what's in the book. The whole book was designed and structured around psychological manipulation and humiliation of me. And the cover of the book has this world that's on fire, that's burning. So what is that? What is that? If that's not fear? I'm sharing all of this with you for the very first time right here, right now, as this knowledge, this information, these insights are coming to me. I may be very, very fortunate indeed that that my book did not go viral, or that I didn't get a publisher, and that millions of people haven't read it. I may be very lucky indeed, because it is clear to me now that, it's one thing to share the truth and be open and honest with people, which I'm doing right now, but I am not humiliating myself. And I'm not humiliating anybody else. I'm just sharing the truth. But I have no agenda. I have nothing that I'm trying to achieve. I have nothing I'm trying to get. I'm not, it's simply showing and revealing, in this particular case, how subtle and how clever and how insidious our egos can be. And we cannot afford to be naive. And that the egos will use paradoxes to their benefit, because they can play both sides. And they don't care, like pride and shame. Pride doesn't care if you love yourself too much or you hate yourself, as long as you're self-obsessed. Well, in my case, that demon which wants to dominate and possess me, and either does so through seizures, or it has a tantrum and causes my depression when it doesn't have that opportunity, or wants to dominate others, and has that tantrum when it doesn't. But what it really wants to do is humiliate. That's it, because now when I realize, like, some of the things I do while I'm having a seizure that I'm not privy to, I don't remember some of the things. And if you recall, a while back, I had a seizure on the program a while back, and maybe it was more than a couple of years ago now, but I had a seizure live on stream. I had a seizure, and I started picking my nose and eating it. So some of the things that the demon has me do is completely humiliating. So it's just it. So humiliation is part of its modus operandi of dominance and control, of possession. It's like someone who wants to humiliate their sexual partner and humiliate them sexually. So, there are fetishes around this. So there's BDSM, right? Bondage, dominance, and sadomasochism. That's BDSM. But there's also a big part of that is humiliation and humiliating the sub, right? The submissive. And there are all sorts of fetishes where people will urinate and defecate on their partner's naked bodies. Like, it's this shit runs really, really. This can go to crazy places, and that there's lots of people that get off on humiliating other people. And if you watch Jerry Springer or any of those daytime talk shows, that there are masses and masses of people that enjoy watching people being humiliated. I mean, there's how many what about those Jackass movies, or how many videos on the internet are there, the fail army videos, where you're watching people falling over and wiping out and having car accidents and everything else, and it's like, there's something that we're getting off on that somehow. We're deriving pleasure from other people's suffering and other people's humiliation. And we're finding it hilarious and funny because, ha ha ha, it wasn't me. It was a good thing it was them, but not me. But that's the separation. But you know what? There, but for the grace of God, go I. And in fact, that is me. That's my brother or sister. And by indulging in that, the act of witnessing that act of humiliation, we are separating ourselves. And we are indulging that. And so this can be extended to one degree or another to comedy. Not to say that we shouldn't learn to laugh at misfortune, because we shouldn't take ourselves so seriously, or we shouldn't, because was it Joan Rivers who said that comedy is tragedy plus time. But we have to learn to find the humor in life and the humor in the lessons of life. Otherwise, things become very dark very quickly. And there are people who, humorless people, joyless people, who end up falling into the downward spiral of depression and self-loathing and even self-deletion because of it. The key then to solving the paradoxes that may be at work in our own psychology and in our own life, where we seem stuck between a hard rock and a hard place, or we're going in circles, or like Neo in the train station in the Matrix, where he goes out one exit and he comes in through the other side, and he just can't seem to escape. Yes, like always, we observe ourselves and remember ourselves, of course. We have to pay attention always, including when we dream and when we fantasize and when we daydream and whatever, as often and as much as possible. And if something catches your eye or catches your attention or seems off, seems strange, meditate on it. Use retrospection meditation and meditate on what seems out of place, or what, or where you intuitively know there's something there, like an archaeologist, right? Who just has a sense, has a feeling, we got to dig here. There's something here. We got to dig deeper. We got to go, or there's a secret chamber nearby. We got to find it. We got to find the mechanism that opens up the door. And right, it is a puzzle. It is a puzzle box. Escaping the matrix is not simple. It's not easy. If it was simple and easy, then everybody would do it. And we have to cultivate free consciousness and the capacity for discernment. Observe yourself, meditate, and cultivate the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And last but not least, remember that on the Alm of Life, we must descend to the next lower level in hell before we can ascend to the next higher level. And I had an experience already because I sold a camera, one of my father's old cameras. And I invited people over to the house to pick it up. And while they were here, they saw the microphone, and I mentioned that they can't come on Sunday because of the live stream. So they started asking about my live stream. And so I had my second monitor is my TV, and I turned it on. I put on my channel and whatever. They were asking about it. I was explaining, I was describing it, and then I played them one of my videos. And we had a lovely conversation, the three of us. She came with her husband, who works in IT and AI. So I played them the video about mechanical minds cannot know the truth. And it was precisely because of the experience that I went through, the depression, the watching the movie about J.D. Salinger and The Catcher in the Rye, and how he was bested by his mechanical nature, even as he thought he was avoiding it. And then the dream about my father and the humiliation and everything. The response I got from these two strangers, these two normies, was different. And it was different because I was different. And maybe it was because they were in my space. Maybe it was because they could see everything on my altar. And maybe it was because, I don't know exactly. I can't describe and put my finger on exactly the reasons that made it different. All I can tell you is that I was cognizant and conscious of these people are in my home and I'm here to serve them. I must be a good host. So I'm not going to insult them. I'm not going to humiliate them. And I'm not going to be like my dad was. And all of this somehow this was like, but it was really just a matter of getting more of myself out of the way of Attlas, because Attlas was is never at a risk of being that way. It was only the conditioning, the layers of conditioning of me still getting in the way of myself. There's too much Attila, too much of the demon. And it was that opportunity to humiliate, that opportunity to take others down a notch, and then tell it like it is. Tell them like it is. There's a way to build others up and tell them what they need to hear, but do so by building them up, not by tearing them down, not by trying to humiliate them or wanting to humiliate them. That no longer works. And maybe that's why the success that my demon desired so much has eluded me for so long, and therefore has eluded him, and the cause of his raging in the subconscious mind. But again, I don't want you to think that this is just all about me. But remember, what matters is experiential knowledge. And if you can benefit from my experience, then I would have you do so. In the same way that if you can benefit, the same way that I benefited from learning about J.D. Salinger's experience. And I saw in that case a profound clue in my own situation. So if by hearing about my situation helps you solve a puzzle that you're facing in your life, then I'm paying it forward. And that I'm trying to build yourself up. I'm not trying to tear myself down in the moment. I'm not trying to humiliate myself, nor am I trying to humiliate anybody else. I hope that this whole situation, the whole scenario, has helped me just become more aware of the nature of that adversary and his many tricks and tactics and modus operandi. But it's also a keen awareness of to be or not to be is the question. It's the puzzle, and at times it's the paradox. And we cannot afford to be naive, and we cannot afford to believe the voices in our head when they tell us, "Oh, you're over that. Oh, I'm over that. Oh," and you know how many people you meet online or whatever, it goes, "Oh, I have no ego anymore. I've done my shadow work. I don't have an ego anymore." Not understanding, not realizing, I don't have an ego anymore. They don't recognize the irony in that statement. They're caught in the paradox. They're caught in the matrix, and they believe that they're awakening. But you can awaken negatively. You can awaken in and through ego, just like J.D. Salinger did. And we know that because of the mystic pride that convinced him that all he needed to do to relinquish all selfishness was to not publish. But by not publishing, he did the most selfish thing he could possibly have done. The movie is The Writer in the Rye. You can find it online. And I found it online and I watched it for free. So Benjamin says, reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Proverbs. Reprove? Okay. So we're over the 3 hour mark. Listen, or almost 3.5 hours. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And Azazel, um, if you want, send me a message or something, and I'll send you a link to a YouTube video where an investigative journalist is looked into some of the alternative medicine that that Jordan Peterson has turned to in his desperation, and some of the alternative medical approaches. There's an investigative journalist that has looked into some of them, and what he's discovered, what he's found, is not good, is not promising. That these medical influencers that push a lot of these experimental and alternative medical treatments, that they're just grifters, and that some of these alternative medical uh, uh, treatments are not only very expensive and unproven, but some of them can be very detrimental, and that it's possible that they're making Jordan Peterson worse, and they're making his medical conditions far worse than they are better. But I don't have all the details, so but I can send you the link to the video that gets into that. Benjamin says, thank you so much for today's live stream, sir. Wishing you a blessed week ahead. Thank you so much, Benjamin. And to you and to everyone, if you have any other questions or comments, please, I'll give you 30 seconds. You want to type one really quick? Or I'll give you a couple minutes, because we're at the 3 hours and almost 3.5 hours. Let's see, what else? Oh, I made a post on Facebook which you will find if you go to Atlas Alex on Facebook. And why don't I pull it up? So I would have to pull up Atlas, and oh yeah, it shows that I'm live. Oh look, it shows that I'm live right there on screen. What happens if we do this? Okay. Okay, so there's a delay, and oh look, wow, Facebook does real-time closed captioning. Wow, pretty impressive. Okay. That's strange. Anyway, so let me scroll down. And where is it? Okay, so it's this video. The Ahrimanic deception is here. Rudolf Steiner's urgent warning to humanity. I highly recommend that to everybody to watch, because it's an excellent summation of this, what you hear me going on and on about all the time, related to mechanical nature versus divine nature. Where did you go?
addressing a public audience today on the...
There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to get was this link. Yeah, you were just, if you heard something in the background, because it was just playing in the background for a moment. Here is the link. I'll put it in the comments. And there it is on screen as well. So, but the title, and again, just go to my Facebook at atlasalex.com. You'll find it there. I posted it today. And here is the title of the YouTube video as well. Okay. The aromatic deception is here. Read the post. That's important because it's important to get some terminology straightened out, because he talks in this video, he talks a lot about the luciferic, the Christic, and the aromatic influences on humanity. So it's important to get those terms straight in your mind if you plan to get anything out of this video. But it's an excellent video. It's 45 minutes, and it really does explain in a very good way. And maybe next week we can flesh this out some more, talk about this some more. And not only that, we can explore some of the dramatic ways in which these influences have expressed and revealed and impacted this humanity via their influence. So anyway, this will make more sense once you watch the video. So this is not 100% certain that this is going to be the topic for next week. I don't want you to think that. It's possible. It's possible, unless something else happens in the next 6 days that takes precedence. But this would be a beneficial video for anyone to watch, and this is also an excellent video to share with others. But if you do share it, I would prefer that you share the Facebook post that has the explanation of the meaning of luciferic and Ahrimanic and anthroposophy. So you'll understand once you read the post. You'll understand why it's important to share the video with the information in the post. Okay? All right. So with that, I want to thank all of you for spending your Sunday afternoon with me again, as usual. And I look forward to seeing you next week. As always, have a safe and productive week, a peaceful week, no matter what you face, and observe yourself, remember yourself, and remember, don't be naive, and keep an eye out, keep a watchful eye out for the puzzling paradoxes that are trying to exploit and take advantage of your divine purpose by conditioning and muddying the waters and conflating and confusing it with their mechanical purposes. All right. Have a great week. And as always, until next time, inferential peace. Take care, everyone.